Yep, so behavioral nudge. First of all, let's discuss about the principle of behavioral nudge. I will just go, uh, I won't go very deep in this, but if you are curious about the material, then there is a link for the books that I use in here, Richard Thaler's book, Nudges or Nudge, I'm not sure how to spell it. Okay, so first of all, what is nudge? So nudge is an aspect of the choice architecture that alters people behavior in predictably way without forbidding any option or significantly changing their economic incentive. So basically, it's something that you do, like it's a component or maybe a treatment, quote unquote, that alters people's behavior in predictable way without forbidding any option or significantly changing their economic incentive. So with this nudge, people will not drastically change the way they behave, or it will not drastically change their economic incentive. So in a way, it's kind of like quote unquote harmless, I would say. And then what are the example of nudge? As an example, putting fruits in the eye level of supermarket checkout counters to encourage people to pick up more fruit to live more healthy is not. So when the supermarket, they put fruit in the eye level in the aisle, then people will more likely to buy the fruit instead of junk food. So that's a type of nudge that encourage more healthy lifestyle. And the other example is if you go to Superindo or Carrefour, you notice that in the checkout line, they usually display candies in the eye level for children, so that when children go to their mom in the checkout line, they will want to ask their mother to buy candies. That's also an example of nudge. Okay, so those are very simple. But nudge actually can also be applied in a lot of other area, especially in the public policy, because in this context, we're going to talk a lot about public policy. So where can nudge be applied? Nudge can be applied across wide range of everyday issues. They include essential decisions like investing, credit market, social security, health, education, as well as controversial, sorry, controversial topics, like for example, demolishing state institute role of marriage. But we're going to talk about public policy in this context. We will have two other paper in here that actually use the application of nudge in the public policy. So according to Richard Toller's book, Nudge, actually it's a fun book to read. So if you want to read it, you should, yeah, because it's very easy to read and it's also interesting. And it's not like, economic books tends to be very highly quantitative and then complex. But Nudge is not like that. It's a fun book to watch. It's a fun book to read. So you should read that if you have time. Okay, or you should make time actually. And then these are the 6 principles of nudge. We have incentive, we have understanding mappings, we have defaults, we have give feedback, we have expect error, and we also have structure complex choices. So what are these? What are these principles? So to circumvent this, public and private sector organization could do well to develop positive choice of architecture. So if you want to apply nudge in a policy, regardless in public or private area, then you can consider these 6 principles. The incentive, provide the right incentive for the right people to enable good decision-making process. This should go beyond monetary and material incentive to include other psychological benefits. Like for example, maybe safety, maybe peace of mind, or things like that. So if you want to do a nudge, consider what are the incentive for the people that you want to nudge. And then the understanding mapping, this is where the policymaker, they should understand the situation of the people that they want to nudge. This looks at how people can better relate to the consequence of different action pathways. Okay, so how the people can benefit from the nudge. And then the defaults. Now, the defaults is it's also about how we should understand the people or the society or the groups that we want to nudge, because sometimes people they sometimes make decision in default. You know, defaults are the ubiquitous, ubiquitous and powerful. People often leave the default decision on if they are too lazy to make decisions. So what are the defaults that people typically do? If we know this, then we can produce an effective treatment, you know, because we know the default, and then give it back. So many times, well, even though the principle of economics say that people are mostly rational, well, sometimes people can also be unpredictable. So not every policy or every nudge scenario that you make will do well in real life. So give feedback. What are the feedbacks of your current design, current policy, or whatever it is? Just give feedback. And then expect error. Yep, because sometimes the society is unpredictable, people are unpredictable. So expect that there will be some error in your scenario. And then the last one is structure complex choices. So when choices become too abundant, people tend to find ways to simplify them and break them down. Good choice architecture will find ways to make this more evident to people. So if there are a lot of options, then sometimes people have difficulty to choose like which one should they do. Then if that is part of your nudge, then you have to be able to structure the complex choices so that people could easily understand. Okay, so that's the sixth principle of nudge. Oh, by the way, if you have any question, I will be happy to answer your question if I could. And if not, we can discuss together. Okay, so this is one of the paper we're going to discuss today. This paper is called Nudging in Developing Nations. You can access this paper in your semester. I have already put it in there. And this is part of the Behavioral Economics Guide 2017. There are a lot of papers in here, actually. I just choose one of them, which is Nudging in Developing Nations, because I personally think this is interesting because we're going to talk about organ donor in here. Okay, that's something we don't talk about much in Indonesia. Okay, so this is the introduction of the paper. So in past few years, behavioral economics has outgrown its origins as an obscure yet groundbreaking academic pursuit. So behavioral economics is more popular nowadays. Once considered to be just an interesting intellectual curiosity, it is now a respected field of study with relevant insight and influence in virtually every area human human behavior is involved. So a lot of people, a lot of policymaker, a lot of private sector, they use behavioral economics approach nowadays. In the context of economic development, most of those organizations use a framework for applying BE or behavioral economics based on three platforms. So in development, we usually see behavioral economics in three platforms. We have sound understanding of human behavior, and then strong data analysis, and then the last one is use of randomized controlled trials. Okay. Okay. Based on these three platform here, organizations can be divided into distinct groups based on their difference with respect to the type of problems they solve. how and where they operate, and how they finance their activities. So if you realize, um, in development economics, we see these three, right? But usually we have two groups, like two distinctive groups, in here. Um, we have discussed poor economics books in, I think, in our previous class, right? If you remember, it used to be our main textbook in development economics 1 or 2, I'm not sure, but we have talked about it before. So in terms of using behavioral economics in this three platform, we usually see some group kind of use the approach that is mentioned in the poor economics book. What they do is usually they are creating evidence-based solution to social development through RCT. Groups or organization that do this, the example is JPAL, Poverty Lab at MIT. And then the other one that we have not discussed too much in this class is the other group that usually called quote unquote nudge unit. Those group use the approach that are mentioned in the book Nudge by Richard Thaler. And what they do is improving the efficiency and effectiveness of public policy programs, mostly by nudging the citizen into better decision making. Okay. Nah, in today's discussion, because we're going to talk about nudge, then what we're going to discuss is what the group like behavioral insight team does. So basically improving the efficiency and effectiveness of public policy programs, mostly by nudging citizens into better decision making. Remember that before this, we have discussed a lot about RCT and how we calculate the effect of treatment and a lot of things like that. But now we add another component that is nudge. So we kind of nudge the citizen into doing better decision making. The nudging process have some kind of let's call it like tools, or maybe I don't know what to call it in English, but it's like quote unquote like guidance to do better decision making. Okay, and nudge in terms of in the context of public policy, um, they sometimes the government do that kind of thing so that the people can be better due to the policy. And then this is one of the case study that we're going to discuss. So we have this paper about organ donation in Mexico. Okay, so donating and transplanting organs has been legally, technically feasible in Mexico since 1963. So in Mexico, you can freely donate or transplant organs without any negative consequences, I guess, because it's legal. Yeah, it's not against. It's not against the regulation. However, this area has some deficiencies since then. Despite the strides made in the past decades in the infrastructure and human resource. Nowadays, possibly one of the biggest challenges has been finding enough donor to meet the organ demand. So we have a shortage in donors. We have excess in organ demand. So not enough people donate their organs. Okay, only about 3.6 out of every 100,000. Oh, that's very small. Out of every 100,000 people in Mexico are organ donor. A very low percentage considering more than 21,000 people in the country need transplants today. At this rate, 1 out of every 3 people on the waiting list will receive organ that they need. Okay, so basically we need more people to donate organ. This is very interesting, yeah. And then what are the current policy that they do? If we summarize the policy in Mexico, then we can summarize it into 2 types of policy. The first policy is the educational campaigns. Currently, there are ongoing efforts by some non-profit to create educational campaign to raise awareness and increase the donors rate in Mexico. Their effort has increased organ donation by 8% in the past year. This is based on a paper by Notimex at 2016. And then a 2012 survey showed that 59% of Mexicans declared their support for organ donation. So there is some effect in the educational campaigns, but the effect is not big enough that we still have a shortage in the organ donation. And then the second policy is the legal standing. So this is from the government. The Mexican government recently passed a legislation to make the organ donation the default. So the government make the organ donation the default. So if you what I mean by default here is unless you choose otherwise, then you will be listed as the organ donor. So that's what I mean by it's the default policy. Okay, it sounds good, right? Because most of the time when we fill in registration or any government documents, we just choose the default because it's easier. It's easier and it's quicker. So this policy sounds really good, but does it work? Let's see. The basic BE theory indicates that this new default will become the path of less resistance. Well, theoretically, it is a good policy, but then substantially increasing the supply. Okay, theoretically, it will substantially increasing the supply of new donors. But in practice, let's see, in practice, however, the choice to be organ donor is far from being a default. In fact, there are 3 possible opt-in mechanisms to become an organ donor. So basically, the policy doesn't work in real life because in real life, the default doesn't work. And we see that in Mexico, currently, there are 3 possible opt-in mechanisms to become a donor. Let me open the regulation here. So to become an organ donor, there are 3 ways that you can register or opt in as organ donor. So it's not really default because to be able to be an organ donor, you need to get a governmentally issued official donor letter signed by authorized official. And this is a complicated process with multiple steps. And then it is not very clear who is the authorized official in this case, which make it hard to follow. Now, if you cannot get the official donor letter, then you can notarize a letter stating that you desire to become a donor. This is another time-consuming process as well as expensive one for many people, because to hire a notary to notarize your letter, then you need some fee, right? And then the third one is you can print an organ donor card, which states your intention to donate, but it is not legally binding. So this is kind of funny, yeah, because you can print an organ donor card, but then it's not really legally binding. This card function as a commitment device, both from yourself and your family. Okay, well, those are the problem with the regulation to be an organ donor in Mexico. Okay, let's identify some problem here. So, as in many places around the world, the driver's license office is where most people decide whether to become organ donor or not. So basically, when you when you go to the DMV in the US, it's called DMV, and then you are going to obtain your new driver's license. That's where the official will ask you, do you want to be an organ donor? Well, the problem arises when in most Mexican cities, people do not fill out the information form themselves. So you do not fill out the form yourself, but rather give the required information to the clerk who is in charge to fill the forms. So whether and how to ask people about organ donation falls on civil servants with mostly no clear directive about how to approach this issue. So because when people apply for their driver license, they do not fill out the application form themselves. They just give it to the officials or the civil servant in there. It is the authority of the civil servant to ask the people like, do you want to donate your donor? Donate your organ. The truth is, the officials do not always ask the question. Either they do not have time because so many applicants and they have to work quickly enough so that they can serve everyone, or it is a topic that is not always easy to be brought. Like you cannot just casually ask people like, do you want to donate your organ when you die? So that's not easy, right? So because there is no binding to for the civil servant, so a lot of time they just don't ask the question. Okay, and then the second one, the second problem is in every hospital there is one certified hospital official, so only one certified hospital official tasked to ask the closest family member or recently deceased individual to give their active consent for organ donation. So what's the problem here? As you can see, because only one certified hospital official, if said official is not at hand or the family member choose not to, the individual might not become a donor. So the official from the hospital is not always in place. So who's going to ask the family? No one. And then sometimes the family, when they are asked, they can also decline. So when someone do not have like the organ donor card or something, then when the family is asked, the family can say no. Like, no, I do not want my family member to donate, my deceased family member to donate the organ. Okay, so those are the problems that we can identify from the paper. So what are the solution? How could we encourage more people to donate organ? So the researcher in the paper, this is their experimental design. So the experimental design for measuring the nudging people into signing the donor cards or official letters was too complex. So to nudge people into signing donor cards or official letters is too complex due to the lack of available data, and then nudging the families to decide on behalf of the relative in the hospital, that would be too controversial and it's going to be a thorny project. And therefore, the researcher in this paper, they choose this. They choose the nudge. Sorry, I mean, they nudge the people by doing this. Therefore, trying to get people to declare themselves organ donors as they renewed the driverless license was the best path forward. Okay, so based on all of the problems, so if you realize what the researcher do here is they identify the current policy and then the problems. What they do here is they do this 6 principle of nudge. So they kind of break down what are the incentive for the people to follow the policy, like what's the characteristic of the policy, and then understanding how the mappings, like how it is in real life, how people react, what the decision they usually choose, and then what are their default decision. And then here they try to structure the complex choice, they say here that it's going to be too complex to nudge people to, oops, sorry, I mean this slide. It's going to be too complex to nudge people to sign the donor cards or getting the official letters. And it's also too controversial to nudge the families to just say yes to donate the organ of their deceased family. So they come to a conclusion that the way they nudge, it should be they must, I mean, they said that it's going to be best to encourage people to declare themselves organ donor as they renew their driver's license. Okay, so how do they do it? So this is how they do it. This is how they do it. The trial measure the effectiveness of 4 different persuasive message. So the nudge here is the persuasive message. Okay. So like I said before, with nudge, how do I spell it? Okay, it should be D in here. So with nudge, let's go back to the first slide. So with nudge, you can alter people's behavior in a predictable way. So it has to be simple enough and predictable without forbidding any option or significantly change in the incentive. So it has to be simple enough, easy enough, safe enough. So here the nudge is going to be 4 different persuasive message to the people renewing their license, and then urging them to register for organ donors. And basically to evaluate whether this nudge works or not, we can consider this persuasive message as the treatment, and then we can see whether the treatment makes difference or not. Okay. The messages are based on well-known behavioral insights, social proof, reciprocity, loss aversion, and simple request to register. Okay, so that's the experimental design that they do to nudge people to register, to nudge more people to register for the organ donor. I think this is very interesting, and I think this is simple enough to be understood. Although there is a downside in here, because this research is not yet published their result, so we don't know. We do not know. Yes, we do not know yet what's the result of this trial. Okay, so if there is a result, I will give you the updated paper, but in the meantime, they still do not publish the updated paper for the result of the trial. Okay, but I think this is interesting and simple enough to understand. Okay, do you guys have any question on or something you want to discuss or comment about this, please?
Yes.
Yes.
Actually, I have a question. I'm still not sure what nudging means. Would you please maybe explain briefly about the nudging, especially in this paper?
Okay. Thank you, Helga. So nudge is kind of like if you do something. So okay, in this context of the paper. So in the beginning, it is said that when people renew their driving license, or when people apply for their driving license, the question about being an organ donor is in the form, right? But the problem is because people do not fill out the form themselves, and then it is the authority of the official to ask the people whether, hey, do you want to be an organ donor or not? And most of the time, the officials do not ask that because of many reasons. Okay, so that's the problem. And then the researcher, they see here that, hey, what if we give them a persuasive message before they renew their driver's license? So when they go to the official, maybe there is a persuasive message, or maybe they are given some persuasive message written pamphlet or anything with persuasive message. After people read the persuasive message, there is chance that maybe they will then change their behavior. Instead of they just do not think at all about being an organ donor. Now, because they have persuasive message, then they might think like, oh, I think it's going to be good if I become an organ donor. You see the difference the difference between the policy here is in the first one, there is no persuasive message. And in the second one, we have persuasive message. But this persuasive message becomes something that changes people's behavior without this person feeling like the change is too drastic, too costly, or too much for them. They just like, maybe it's better for me to become an organ donor. Nah, this type of treatment that change people behavior, but in a very simple way, in a non very drastic way, we call it nudge. Okay, so the nudge here is something that alter people's behavior without a drastic change. Does that help you, Helga?
Yes, Miss. Thank you very much.
Yeah, you're very welcome. Anybody else have any question? Okay, if no question yet, that's okay. So that's the first paper. Unfortunately, we don't have result. Yeah, this is interesting. Once we get the result or the paper is updated, I will let you know. So that's the first one. What about the second paper? The second paper is called Home and Community-Based Growth Monitoring to Reduce Early Life Growth Faltering, an open label cluster randomized controlled trial. Okay, so we're going to use some randomized controlled trial in here. So basically, in Africa, I think if I'm not mistaken, let me check. Okay, in Zambia, there is a problem with growth faltering. What's growth faltering? Let me open my notes so I can explain to you what growth faltering is. So growth faltering is defined as growth rate below that which is appropriate for an infant's age and sex. So it's a problem with growth. Like for example, for a boy, for a child who is a boy, maybe in the age at 5 years old, they should weigh this much, and they should have height this much. But their weight and their height is not the appropriate rate. So that's growth faltering. Like for example, maybe someone is underweight, someone is stunting, or things like that. Okay, so basically that's a problem with the growth development in child. Okay. Now, the background for this study is despite the continued high prevalence of faltering growth, height monitoring remains limited in many low and middle income. So we already know that there is a problem regarding faltering growth in low and middle income countries. But the problem is height monitoring is still limited. So people don't usually monitor their child development. Like they don't know whether the height of their child in that age is appropriate or not. The weight also is appropriate or not. They do not monitor it. So that's the problem here. And the objective of this study was to test whether providing parents with information on their child's height can improve the children's height and developmental outcomes. Nah, like I said before, when we give people treatment that's going to hopefully alter their behavior, but not at a very drastic way, it's called nudge, right? So this treatment with providing more information to the parents, this is the nudge in here. Sometimes we might think nudge in the concept of encouragement. Well, that's fine at some in some context. Sometimes it can be thought as some type of encouragement, or well, some type of information. And that's also usually what nudge is. Okay, so this is the objective of the study. We want to provide parents with the information, and we will see what are the effect of giving parents information. Is it going to improve the child's height and developmental outcomes? Okay. This is the design of the experiment. So they do this in the village in Chipata district in Zambia, and the sample size is 127. Were randomly assigned with randomly assigned with equal probability to 1 or 3 groups. So we have 3 groups in here. The first group, they are going to receive home-based growth monitoring, or HBGM. And then the second group is going to receive community-based growth monitoring, including nutritional supplementation for children with stunt growth, or CBGM plus NS. And then the last one is the control group. So we randomly assign, I guess in this case, assign children, yeah, if I'm not mistaken. The sample size is 127, or household, I'm not sure. And then they are going to be divided into 3 groups: the HBGM, and then the CBGM plus NS, and then the control group. So we have 2 treatment in here, yeah. Treatment with the home-based growth monitoring, and then treatment with community-based growth monitoring, plus nutritional supplementation for children with stunt growth. And then the primary study outcomes were individual height for each Z-core or HAS. You must already familiar with HAS, because I'm sure Pak Gumilang talked about HAS several times. And then overall child development assessed with the International Fetal Newborn and Growth Consortium for 21st Century Neurodevelopment Assessment Tool. And then the secondary outcomes were the weight for each Z-score or WAS, protein consumption, breastfeeding, and general dietary diversity. So the outcome of the study, we want to compare the HAS and the WAS and other outcome, yeah. But the important one is HAS and WAS in here. So let's see. This is the design. We have 2 treatment, and then control group, and then 2 outcomes. Let's see the result. Oh, okay. So this is I guess this is number of village here, because this is based on cluster, yeah. So we have 127 village, and then after that, the results show that we enrolled, or the researcher enrolled 447 children with median age at 30 months old at baseline. And then after they estimate the result of the treatment, they find that estimated mean difference in HAS was 0.127, and then this is significant at alpha 5%. And then for HBGM, this is the mean difference in HAS between the base group or the control group and with the HBGM group, and then the difference between the base group or control group with the CBGM plus NS is negative 0.152 and significant at alpha 5%. Okay. And then we can see that the HBGM had no impact on child development with the beta negative 0.017. And then the CBGM plus NS reduce overall child development, which is kind of odd, yeah, resultnya. I mean, out the result with the score 0.111. And then both intervention has larger positive effects among children with stunt growth at baseline. So we see here that the result, the estimated mean difference in terms of HAS into for two different treatment with the baseline is not very high, but when we compare the treatment for the stunt growth children, they have a larger positive effect. So for the children who has no stunt growth, like their growth is normal, it doesn't really affect much. But for the children who are have stunt growth or they have problem with the growth and development, then the treatment have larger positive effect. So we have the estimated interaction effect is 0.503. It's like almost 50%, and then 0.582 respectively for the CBGM plus NS and HBGM respectively. And then the HBGM increase the WAS for the stunt children, I guess, 0.183. And then both intervention improve parental reports of children's protein intakes. So these are the statistic result. Okay. And then in the conclusion of the study, then the result from this trial suggests that growth monitoring has limited effect on children's height and development. Okay. So even though in the theory it sounds really good, yeah, in the concept we kind of expect that if we give parent more information regarding the monitoring and we give them treatment, we kind of expect that it's going to affect the height and development of the children in a lot, yeah, but it doesn't happen. It seems like the result is limited for most children, despite improvement in self-reported feeding practice. Nevertheless, like I said before, specifically for children who has who have stunt growth, the effect is larger and positive, yeah. But for most children with normal growth, it's just limited effect. And then we also see from the study that HBGM had modest positive effect on children with stunt growth. Now, this is what I said before. Given its relatively low cost, now because the HBGM has positive effect on children with stunt growth, we can also say that given its relatively low cost, this intervention may be cost-effective tool for increasing parental efforts towards reducing children physical growth deficit. Okay, so because it has been proved that this works in stunt growth, and then it's relatively low cost, so it's one of the good option or good policy to increase parental efforts towards reducing children's physical growth deficit. Okay. Okay. So that's it for the second paper. Do you have any question regarding this paper or other part of the material? Okay, if you don't have a question, I think it's okay. That's fine. But for me personally, I think the approach of behavioral economics is interesting, yeah. And if you are interested to incorporate the behavioral economics approach in your project, I think that will be great. Although it might make your project a little bit more complex, but why not? You have all the time until the UAS week, so that's fine. I guess if you don't have any more question, that's it from me today. Thank you very much for coming, and the material is already in semester. And if you have any question, you can send me an email, and then see you again on Friday this week. Okay, goodbye. Have a nice day.
Thank you, Miss.
Thank you, Miss.
Thank you, Miss.
Thank you, Miss.